Okay, so YouTube have lovingly changed how they do the live streams. Now I can't actually see on the screen what's actually going on, but right, here we are. Lots happening in sport. We know that Aston Villa players and coaching staff have agreed a wage deferral. That's some good news. Chelsea, however, are still at loggerheads with their players over wage deferrals, and it's really complex because what appears to be happening is the players are digging their heels in, and that's not good. On the Arsenal side of things, Mesut Ozil seems to be digging his heels in about a wage cut or wage deferral, and that's dividing opinion. And then you've got ex-players like Roy Keane coming in and saying, like, why are players being the ones asked to take wage cuts and wage deferrals? Why is the press on them? So it's all on the wage deferral and wage cut front. It's still making headline news. It's still creating division, still causing issues. On the side of other sports, the NHL could return first week of July. The NRL is aiming to come back on the 28th of May, which I think is too soon, but we'll see what Australian Rugby League does. There's a whole host of other bits and pieces going on. We know that F1 have cancelled, I think, 9 races so far. Could that season be completely written off? We know that the NFL draft took place virtually, so no one in attendance, which is interesting. That's never happened before. Normally, you've got the general managers and team officials in attendance. That never happened. That's something completely different. So there's a lot going on that needs to be digested. Snooker's obviously given a restart date at Crucible, 31st July. That's really interesting. So we could see a enclosed sports arena. Will fans be in attendance? Will they not? That's something up for debate, and is really interesting. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot to dissect. There's a lot to understand. Now, the World Rugby election is also taking place next month. That's going down to the wire. There's a whole host of debates about how they're going to restructure. Rugby's in a mess financially. All the headlines we're seeing of teams furloughing coaches and players and non-playing staff being put on the wage retention scheme doesn't look good. And that's part of the core debating point is rugby's finances. Absolutely. Rugby is really under financial strain. We've seen, obviously, Rugby Union in Australia, at least, Ryling Castle, the CEO, resign. I think it was a matter of time before they reviewed her performance and sacked her, to be honest. The ex-captain signing the open letter, that's interesting. It's something that when you have public pressure like that, it does tip the scales. On the cricket side of things, the ECB are still trying to forge ahead with this 100 format that no one wants, and they even did their calculations financially. If the first season of the 100 was a cracking success with fans, it would still make a £7.5 million loss. And with no cricket until at least the 1st of July, and with growing calls for it to be completely scrapped and just revamp the T20 Blast with all 18 counties rather than have this 100 format that no one really wants apart from the ECB. They're the ones pushing and driving this initiative, and really I don't think they did their market research, because they're aiming to get new fans in attendance and attract new fans. But if you're pissing off your existing fan base that is already annoyed, you're not really going to make up the difference. They pump loads of money in. It's lackluster. I mean, the idea is stupid anyway. It just seems like some TV executive was high as a kite on cocaine and came up with the idea, and the ECB were like, we're desperate for anything. We'll have it. Now, yeah, they put something on free-to-air TV. Great. I don't want to watch it. I'm not sure any cricket fan really wants to watch that. What they want is the existing formats on free-to-air TV. That's all they wanted. They want some Test cricket back, and the ECB decided to go the other direction, and they are just losing money on this. Because all the responses I've seen online, on social media, they're not good. They are wholly negative. And the only people coming out in favour of those on centralised ECB contracts who basically have to say yes to everything the ECB does. They cannot disagree because it's written into their contract, I believe. Absolutely bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. The county game's struggling. T20 Blast has been devalued by this 100 format, and they're growing calls to just scrap it. It's a money pit anyway. If it's predicted to make a loss with fans in attendance, and that's selling out every ground and every game, and you're still predicted to make a loss of 7.5 million and not make the revenues back of the money invested, it's just a pointless exercise. If the ECB are already struggling financially, why make a loss on more money? Why not just open up the existing formats to the wider audience? Best way to get fans viewing or new fans in is to make make the sport more accessible, not to put yet another layer of crap in the way that we don't need. And that's plain and simple. That's basically what the ECB have done. They have ham-fisted it. The team names, there's no real loyalty to the counties. The KP Snacks is a fast food producer, so it's not really the healthiest thing they could have come up with, even though there are other sponsors of cricketing teams that, you know, are out there. And the only people who seem to be saying yes to this are those on centralised contracts. Most of the criticism, 95% of the criticism, they're risking turning fans off. They're risking just the whole future of the game financially as well, especially when you have counties that are struggling to draw fans. There's people watching on Sky TV than at the peak of the Ashes in 2005. So the TV deal they currently have with Sky is questionable. The fact they only put one free-to-air game of the World Cup on TV, that was an absolute disgrace. And again, it's because the Murdoch media, because Murdoch still has shares in B Sky B, have too much control over sport in this country. And you could say globally as well, the Murdoch media has too much influence on society. I think we need to have a rethink on the media rights of certain sports, especially international sport. If you've got a World Cup, it should be on free-to-air TV or free-to-air or free streaming like YouTube, where the ad revenue pays for itself because you reach a wider audience. Putting it behind a paywall has been proven, as a study showed, to reduce participation and actually reduce fans. It turns people off. And since cricket's been behind the Sky Sports paywall, the county game has just been decimated financially for fans. Less people turning up. And you can't have things like the T20 Blast on free-to-air TV to reach that wider audience, reach those young people that they're trying to bring in with this 100 format. It's no idea. Oh yeah, no, you can have targeted advertising. Not that I'm a massive fan of how they gather our data. And I've had issues with that, and I stopped using Facebook for a while, and I stopped using Twitter for a while because of the data gathering aspect. But if you're an Australian, you might want to have I don't know. I don't know what the banking sector's like in Australia, but you might want to have ANZ Bank. You might want to open an account with them. You might have an account with them or a mortgage, and they might go, okay, we'll target you with some ANZ Bank products. You might want to travel to around the world. You need an airline, Qantas. You can be targeted with Qantas ads because it's your geographical location. You might like to buy a Holden, even though Holden is disappearing in the next 12 months, but you might be an existing Holden customer, or a GM customer. So they understand that, okay, you purchased a Holden or another GM type manufactured car. Well, that will target your advertising with the latest Commodore. I do think, yes, you can also set your preferences as well. You can set your ad preferences. So as I'm more of I like my video games and I like my sport, most of my ads are video game or sport based that are targeted for me. So sports, I mean, I've got my water bottles here, so I get targeted ads. But I find it bizarre that the ECB are still forging ahead, and this is a current uncertainty is making their losses even bigger because no cricket's taking place, and because the county game's already down the shitter, quite literally. It's compounding the issue that the fact they've even admitted in their own figures, if the 100 was played in front of packed stadiums, packed grounds, and every seat was sold, and everyone watched on TV, they're still making a loss of 7.5 million on the investment in the first year. That is insanity. That is already showing a flawed product. If you can't even break even in your first year on a big investment like that, you might as well go sod it. Declare if the ECB was a standalone private company, they've declared bankruptcy. They have folded. This is why loads of startups fail. If you cannot predict that you are close to breaking even in your first year on an investment like this, you might as well go, Christ, who came up with this idea? They deserve to be sacked. And whoever in the ECB is driving, is continually putting more money into a money pit, they deserve to be sacked. Morning, Jason. How are you doing after yesterday's emergency overtime? Yeah, it's been an interesting one on the football front because now the Dutch league is obviously the Dutch FA have gone no more football in any league, no cup competitions. We're avoiding it. It raises the question whether that it will be the Bundesliga going by itself, and it then puts pressure on you away from the Champions League and Europa League tournament in August. I think we're going to see it to become more likely that they just call this season. No title awarded, so Liverpool fans can be up in arms about that, but it would be the same if it was any other club at the top of the table. No relegation. They might have to look at promotion relegation in the lower leagues, restructure, maybe expand the Premier League by a couple of teams, and just go and start with next season. That, yes, means we lose the FA Cup. It does affect European qualification, or they could go by various other methods to make sure there is a title awarded and there are promotion relegation. It's interesting. I think we are on the precipice of UEFA itself, because UEFA itself have had this extraordinary general meeting a couple of weeks ago where saying they had 3 plans in place to get leagues restarted. Beginning of May, which is where the Bundesliga have got their provisional date. Beginning of June, and the 30th of June as the last possible day to restart leagues in order for their games to be finished, and then the Champions League and Europa League to be played in a mini knockout tournament in August over a 3-4 week period. Because the Dutch league have now come out and said no, we're cancelling, and there's growing evidence in Scotland that they're going to do the same in Scotland with the remaining Premiership games up north of the border. It is going to be interesting to see what the other European top leagues do, because Germany obviously are wanting to go ahead, but that also hinges on the federal government and the state governments in Germany all agreeing that yes, this industry can get back to some sort of semi-normality, and fans won't be in attendance till October. And for everyone who says, all the top flight clubs, they all, with the TV deal, they can survive, they can't. Because the TV deal across Europe has been decimated. We have top flight clubs across Europe saying we will go bust. We are writing off losses with our owners having to pump money in, which is in breach of financial fair play, which UEFA have said are broken anyway. Because Norwich have admitted they face a £35 million loss. Now, they're a club on a far smaller budget. And if they're going to be losing that much, a loss, think of what the losses are for the clubs with bigger fan bases and bigger wage packets. If those losses are not sustainable, if they're losing that much already in just a couple of weeks of lockdown, just imagine ongoing. They need to come to a decision whether they either void the season, call the season as is, and go on a fair play system, or projected wins, losses, or whatever they do mathematically with the advanced stats, or they do try and just play out this season and then curtail next season. They need to come to a decision soon, though, because the longer it stays in flux, the more uncertainty, and uncertainty for business, as we know, is not good. It does scare off potential investors. Now, I've been bugged about the Newcastle United takeover. There are challenges from the beIN Sports Network, which is a Qatari-owned network, and it's all political. And now Amnesty and International, all these human rights organisations, who I find are whiny lefties, because they're whinging about this Saudi takeover of Newcastle, but they didn't whinge about the World Cup. They didn't whinge as loudly about the World Cup going to Qatar or Man City being bought by the Dubai royal family, because all of Saudi and the other Arabian Peninsula nations all have pretty shitty human rights records. They're suddenly whinging about the Saudi one when they've been silent for so long about other Arab money in football. For so long, they have been silent. They didn't whinge about PSG being bought by the Qatari royal family. They didn't whinge about beIN Sports being set up, a very dodgy media company that suddenly gets loads of TV rights out of nowhere after PSG are bought. They didn't whinge about them, but they're whinging about the Newcastle United one. I'm sensing a bit of politics here. And they're saying, it will damage the Premier League's reputation. Well, you've already got corrupt money in football. We know this. We know Abramovich is an oligarch, links to organised crime. We know that you had Cellini at Leeds, had to get Leeds in there for you, Jason. Convicted criminal, convicted fraudster, again, links to the mafia. We know that there's across Europe, there's links. So in Marseille, Marseille Olympique links to the Corsican and French mafia in their ownership. Yeah, and these groups have committed human trafficking offences, murder, links to terrorism. Not once have any of these human rights organisations or the media really kicked off about where the money comes from until now. I find that very hypocritical. And to be honest, you could look at Mike Ashley's record as an employer, and he breaches health and safety and employment law regularly. He's never been prosecuted for some of his dodgy business dealings and business practices. And a lot of the time, they are illegal. They don't meet standard. But suddenly, out of nowhere, human rights. I think it's all too coincidental. I think the Premier League's already sullied its reputation by the sheer greed and a lot of the corruption that goes with it. There's been no attempt to put fans first. There's been no attempt to actually really ask questions where the money comes from over a fit of proper persons test, which we know is flawed. And the whole ownership club system in Europe is deeply. I mean, we know that in other clubs there are links to organised crime groups and terrorist organisations through money laundering. They haven't kicked off before. They're suddenly kicking off now. I don't know why. It's bizarre. But Amnesty International have a hard on for bashing Saudi Arabia, but they don't bash other nations that have, dodgy links to human rights abuses and other owners who've got links to criminal activity and other dodgy bits and pieces. But they like going after Saudi Arabia. It gives them a moist patch in their crotch. But I find it that they've waited this long as well. They didn't just come out straight away when it was known that the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia were interested in being an 80% stakeholder in the takeover of Newcastle. You've got the Reuben brothers. They're tax exiles. They don't pay tax in this country. They bugger off to Monaco and live in tax exile. They're worth billions. No one's complaining about them being part of the takeover. No one's complaining about Amanda Staveley being part of the takeover, but they are having a go at the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, even though they have shown interest in multiple Premier League and Championship clubs in this country. Only now are they starting to kick up a fuss. I find it absolutely bizarre that for years, this Public Investment Fund, this Saudi group of businessmen who want to obviously widen economic interests of Saudi Arabia, which it's their nation's right to do, and increase their industry and things like that, and modernise the country, which it sorely needs. And I do agree with that. And suddenly, out of nowhere, now they're starting to kick off. It's why does sport have to become a political football all the time? Excuse the pun, but how it does raise questions about the fit and proper persons test. It does raise questions about the integrity of the sport. Yes, I do agree with that. But why this particular case? Why not a whole host of owners who over the years have shown that they're not fit to run not just football clubs, but a whole host of sporting ventures? When you look at where the money comes from, there is organised crime, there is tax evasion, not avoidance, because that's two different things. There is, money laundering involved, human rights abuses, but, it's why now? Why at this particular time are they suddenly kicking up a fuss? I find it the timing suspicious. And bearing in mind the Qatari PSG owners, they own beIN Sports. They got a very cushy TV deal out of buying PSG, which again is a conflict of interest, breaches financial fair play, and is highly suspicious. They're linked to the Qatari bid, which has been proven to be won by criminal activity, bribery, and there are human rights abuses in Qatar. No one's stopping the World Cup going ahead in Qatar. Absolute joke. They gave the World Cup to Russia. We know there's human rights abuses in Russia. Didn't stop it there. So I find this quite bizarre. They keep doing this. It'll be interesting to see if the bid does stall or if it goes ahead. And if it goes ahead, I couldn't give a toss what the media say. There seems to be a mainstream media for some reason seem to want to prevent Newcastle, and they have a thing against Newcastle United. But when a player from the northeast does really well, they end up in the national side. And you've got players like Jordan Henderson, captain of Liverpool. He's from the northeast. Yes, he's from Sunderland, but he's from the northeast. You've had Alan Shearer, former England captain, Premier League winner with Blackburn, and Premier League record goal scorer. So when a player from the northeast does really well, yeah, they sing his praises. But when a club in the northeast wants to do really well, they try their best to smear them. The Netflix documentary with Sunderland is just a hatchet job. It's painful to watch. And it's basically a hatchet job. My view, it's just there for clickbait. It's a hatchet job. And Mike Ashley, I mean, he's destroyed Newcastle financially. I mean, they've lost loads of money since his ownership. They've struggled on the field. It's the war between him and the fans. But the media are trying to basically sabotage Newcastle's rebirth as getting rid of this guy who doesn't care about the club, doesn't care about the city the club's in, doesn't care about the fans, all he wants to do is make money. But what I also find interesting is Sky Sports were loving it up when Saudi Arabia had boxing out there and golf out there. Saudi Arabia trying to open up to the West and the wider world. They love when other sports events go to Saudi, but when Saudi want to buy a British club, oh no, you can't do that. It's like shit, absolute like a shit. All about some TV being sports, which is a dodgy TV company anyway, because they suddenly out of nowhere got some very cushy, TV deals for sports around the world very, very quickly. And they have dubious backing themselves from a regime in Qatar that has committed brutal human rights abuses, much like Saudi Arabia. If you are of a Shia Muslim background, you have less rights, and you are normally beheaded in public squares, because they still have public beheadings there as well. They still have the execution policy. They still commit public executions. No one whinges about them. It's hypocrisy of the highest order. I hope Newcastle, the deal goes through, just to give two fingers to the mainstream media. We shall see on that. On the side of, if football does come back behind closed doors, the debate about free-to-air TV coverage. Sky and BT are resisting this. The more they resist, the worse the image looks for them. They've made a lot of money over the last, Sky have, I don't know about BT, are hemorrhaging money, but Sky have made a lot of money out of Premier League football and Championship football and keeping football basically behind a paywall for so long. That I don't think they can justify blocking that. They risk their reputation. And Sky, Murdoch, I can't believe people still buy Murdoch Media products. There's going to be a day of reckoning where, people turn. And I think they are. I don't think people are going to have the money to pay for these TV subscriptions and have the money on to hand, because it's a rip-off, it's a mug-off job. And you could argue that the business model is outdated now, but we'll see what happens. I mean, the Minister for Sport, Media and Culture, he's basically said he's trying to get the TV companies to allow free-to-air coverage on various channels, which is what it should be. It should be shared rights. You should have a choice whether you want to be ripped off paying Sky and BT stupid money, or actually have a choice to actually watch a game free-to-air. You should have that choice. Whether you give money over to some dodgy media company, or you just pay TV license, and that's the way on that one. But media rights is a big issue, and the TV companies are resisting furiously. Even though BT Sport, when it was set up, was meant to be a free-to-air sports network, that didn't last very long. So their premise of being allowed these rights was, you're free-to-air, right? On Freeview and FreeSat. Yes. And then within a few weeks, they suddenly went behind a paywall, and the government let them. Cooking breakfast on your barbecue. You are a cheeky bastard. I would love a barbecue right now, but I don't have one. And obviously, with social distancing rules, I can't go around my mates and have one down the road, because he's got his bar and his garden and his barbecue. So I can't do that, which is highly frustrating. It is barbecue weather. It's a shame that you can't have the sport on in the background and have a barbecue, but that's something we could possibly look forward to if all goes well with the lockdown measures and things in place going forward. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. Right, let's have a look at other sports. So yes, well, I've ranted about football, and I am getting annoyed with football because we've seen so many players break these lockdown measures. Moises Keane had a house party. Kyle Walker apparently had prostitutes over his house and had a bit of a get together with possibly some stimulants there. So he's in real hot water with Man City, and Kyle Walker is just sniffing his career up the wall. If it's not NOS, it's cocaine. If it's not cocaine, it's booze. If it's not that, it's mixed with all three. And he's got sex workers in his house. What a tit. And then you have, obviously, Jack Grealish ploughing his Range Rover into a parked car after leaving a barbecue. Again, so you could actually name a starting 11 with substitutes of football players who are basically being tools. Oh no one's gone a full Andy Flintoff yet and capsized the pedalo or Andy Powell and driven a golf cart down the M4. But we are getting to that stage where why is it football players are the ones really misbehaving during this time? It's getting. I'm getting really pissed off with football because there seems to be no direction. It seems to be each league is just making up its own choices with their various FAs. UEFA are trying to push for all leagues to restart. The Dutch have gone, no, we're not doing that. The Scottish are going, we're probably not going to do that. And then it's Germany going, yeah, we'll do it because we want to. So there's a division within European football, which could lead to a division within UEFA as well. There could be a divide within UEFA, the governing body of Europe, and that in itself makes things very interesting going forward. On the side of when do we find out when the new World Rugby president is? Sometime next month. That's when the election takes place. How they're going to do it, I think they're going to do it by electronic voting. It is interesting. Some sources are saying P-Shot wins by 26 votes to 25 on projected voting. Other sources saying Bill Beaumont wins by a vote. So it is interesting, but Bill Beaumont's idea of allowing players to switch international allegiance towards the end of their careers is not a great idea. It turns the international selection rules, which are already a mockery, where you can just qualify for a nation after 3 to 7 years, depending on national law of residency. Hence why half the French team is foreign and not French. It's the French Foreign Legion. It turns the international selection rules, which are already a mockery in certain people questioning tier 1 nations having so many non-nationals basically in their teams, into rugby league where you can play for like 5 different nations. It really devalues international rugby union. We shall find out sometime in May. I've got to double check when the date is. It will be interesting because some sources are putting P-Shot as ahead on polling. Others are putting Bill Beaumont ahead, and it comes down to a vote. It is close. There's only a vote in it. If anyone abstains, it could be a tie. I think rugby does need a change of direction. Some of P-Shot's ideas are borderline eccentric. Some of Bill Beaumont's are basically trying to sop to the unions he could lose on the voting side of things. But either way, it's going to be interesting. But I think Bill Beaumont's time at the top, he needs to move aside. It's turning into FIFA. It's turning into Sepp Blatter being there for so long. And that means there's the risk of nepotism, corruption, and stagnation within a sport. And then question marks will be raised about the integrity of the organisation. And I think P-Shot is possibly the right guy. And maybe not all of his ideas get approval. I think he's more democratic. I think he'll put them on the table and then allow more say from the unions about what happens. But we are seeing the sport at a crossroads, and look at it financially. From the financial point of view, it is in a mess, and this crisis has highlighted the weak financial structures that rugby union has. Very weak. It's not as ring fenced in the sense of it's got financial backup where it's saved money over recent years. It is very susceptible to crisis like this, and it has been highlighted quite severely in recent weeks that financially the structures that rugby union have are very tenuous and very weak. And it's really backfired how asleep at the wheel of the authorities in rugby have been, be it at national union level at the various nations, and then at the government at international level with World Rugby, it has sort of been asleep at the wheel. And when you look at like something like Rugby Australia, where it's a financial money pit and is in complete and utter disarray, and if it was a public listed company, if it was a private firm in the private sector, it would have probably gone bust. And then you have to ask questions about some of the financial dealings of Rugby Australia with axing Western Force, but pumping money into a money pit that is the Melbourne Rebels. Giving Israel Folau, Corabetti, Radradra all these big contracts to lure them from rugby league, where they were superstar players anyway. There is no doubt on that. They were superstar players, but it was a win now mentality for a team that was declining. It wasn't investing enough in the youth and the grassroots and the amateur game and the national competition, the Shute Shield, which, by the way, is a joke of a competition for quality level and pay for players and attendances from fans. It does raise questions about direction that Rugby Australia is taking. And we know that Super Rugby as a whole has got declining crowds, and the TV deal, which was put before Rugby Australia, for example, was less than what they currently have in place financially, because the TV companies have realised people aren't watching this. People aren't turning up to games. We can't justify spending this amount of money to prop up a sport that clearly is declining in popularity when you've got rugby league and Aussie rules that are far, far ahead in participation. Registered players, fans, fan memberships, season tickets, merchandise sales, far, far ahead. Then you get to Rugby Union Australia. Roger Federer, I think he still wants to play another year. This break could have done him the world good. Absolutely. I think having this time off, all players have niggly little injuries, and they said Andy Murray wouldn't play again. And Andy Murray came back from his hip surgery and has played reasonably well. I think at this length of time off, if you've got any niggling injuries, bit of rest for the body, yeah, he could have another year in him, a full year if they get back to the normal tennis cycle. Absolutely, I think he's got another year or so left in him. Will he go into coaching? Will he? Quite possibly. He could just retire completely. Be done. He's earned enough money. He's a multi. He's worth hundreds of millions. He has his own clothing line. He has his own cologne as well. He's quite a successful businessman away from tennis, so he's got a career either way. Whether he goes into coaching or in the media, it's quite possible. Whether he sets up a tennis school or something, it's quite possible that he could set up a tennis academy. A lot of ex-players have done that, who have been rather successful. No one's been as successful as Roger Federer. I mean, he's the greatest player of all time. But I think he's still got time left in the game as a player. It's up to him. I think this break could be where he looks at it and goes, I've had this extra rest, body feels refreshed. I feel I can have another run at a Grand Slam or have a good run in a Grand Slam. But we'll have to see. He might go, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to retire at this point, put a date and go, this is it. But I think, yeah, he could still compete at the top level. He's shown that he's still competitive at the top level. I suppose his action and the way he plays is less physical. I suppose it's more a relaxed action. It's less tense. Whereas Nadal and Djokovic and Murray are very tense, very emotional. They play a more aggressive style, and they're the ones who've actually, ironically, had more injuries. Federer's had less injuries throughout his career. Towards the end, in recent years, he's had a few little niggles that have meant time off. But if you look at the amount of injuries Federer's had compared to the other three, they've had a lot more between them, and they're all younger. So I think Federer could have the longest career out of all of them. If you look at the professional senior debut to when he retired, the length of time. Could he be the most winningest player in all time? Djokovic might have something to say about that. Nadal, I don't think he's got enough left in him to win enough titles, but he could still push Djokovic. And then you've got Murray. I think injuries have really hampered his career throughout. But it's the style of tennis they play. They play a more aggressive, I wouldn't say physical because it's only a non-contact sport, but they do play a more aggressive emotional style where you put a lot more strain on the body, where Federer seems more relaxed and more fluid. And I wouldn't say laissez-faire. I think he plays a more tactical game, and he doesn't necessarily have the fastest forehand or backhand or serve. He plays an all-round game that's flowing. So I think that's probably why, one of the reasons why his body is less wrecked. That's probably why I think he plays another year or so. He'll probably will, at the end of his career, retire at 38, 39, whereas Djokovic, Nadal, and Murray will retire by 34. I think he has those extra legs in him because of his style of play. He's managed his body very, very well. He's got, as you say, he's got that style which is not overly aggressive, but it's efficient. It's actually quite a very nice style to watch. He's very fluid. But again, it's subjective what style of tennis you want. If you want explosive action, you've got Nadal. You want passion, you've got Murray and Djokovic. You want calmness and relaxed style, you've got Federer. And then you have all the others like Del Potro and Wawrinka have also won, and Cilic who've also won majors since Federer has been a professional who's still active. So there are other players who've pushed at the big three, big four. So but all these other players have had more injuries than Federer. Federer, I think, is one of the fittest players. I think his style of tennis has a reason why he's avoided injury. He has been very lucky, I think, as well. A lot of luck runs with an individualistic sport like tennis, where you are doing a lot of running around and you have to use all your muscle types. Other sports, because they're team sports, you're not necessarily in action all the time yourself. Your teammate takes the ball up or the puck up or whatever team sport is, and then you have a quiet spell in the game for a few minutes, and then you're back in action again. So it's an interesting one. But it's the same with golf. Certain golfers have a certain action that actually leads to more injury. But you look at those golfers that are playing into their 40s and 50s and 60s on the main tour, they generally have had less injury, and their problems normally are with confidence hitting the fairways and putting. Tiger Woods, I don't think he makes it 2-3 more years. I think he will pack it in, because the way he's obviously had so many back surgeries and leg surgeries, he's lost a bit of the power. And because the way golf works with the body, you are putting a lot of strain on your back and your arms. And he's obviously had surgery on his back. So it's one of them. But again, you've got some very, very energetic golf players who really are twitchy. They've got a lot of nervous energy. They've got quite a bit of power in the upper body. But at the same time, they put a lot more strain on their spine and their back muscles. And like a Tiger Woods, who's a power golfer, he really is, that's affected his health. But again, it is what it is. I think on the back of the rugby thing, international eligibility should have less loopholes, absolutely. This is where rugby league really falls flat, is you can just go, I've got British heritage, Irish heritage, maybe some Italian or French, but I'm Australian. I'm born in Australia, but I've got heritage from, I might have a bit of South Sea Islander in there. I can choose one of 6 nations to play for because of my heritage. That's where it's really flawed. I know there's the grandfather, grandmother rule where you can go back to your grandparents' generation. It is a flawed concept. It is a flawed selection system. And if rugby union goes that route, what rugby league has done, it really devalues the sport at international level. This is why I like watching club level league, because it's just, it doesn't matter where the players are from. It's club level. It's the best club players in the NRL and in the Super League going hammer and tongs for 80 minutes. And I like watching international rugby union because the selection rules are tighter. It means it's a more integral part of the game. And people go, which code do I prefer? I don't. I just prefer watching rugby league at club level and rugby union at international level because of those reasons. If league had the same current selection rules internationally that union did, I would watch more international rugby league. Absolutely. The problem that you find is that you look at Radradra, for example. He's played for Fiji, he's played for the Australian national side in rugby league. He's also played for the Wallabies and Union. He's a Fijian. He's got no links to Australia by birth or by marriage. It's all Fijian, yet he's somehow got residency, and rugby league said, yeah, you can play for Australia, you play for Fiji, but that's all right. So it makes a mockery out of it. Falau, he's I think going to be playing at Samoa. I think he's selected to play for for the Rugby League World Cup next year. Sonny Williams also selecting Samoa, where he could choose New Zealand because he's represented the All Blacks, but his cousin plays for Samoa Rugby Union. Again, mockery because he's won a World Cup with New Zealand in both Union and League, and he's now going. Now I'm going to play for Samoa at next year's World Cup. That to me, while he's a great player in both codes, does make a mockery of international selection. But it's the same with the Olympics as well. When do I think the Premier League will return, and if it will return? If we're going by the Bundesliga, they're looking at May 9th as a provisional date in Germany, but that is also dependent on the federal and state governments of Germany. We do have a sort of a very similar system here with the devolved government. So at the moment, there are no Welsh clubs in the Premiership because Cardiff and Swansea are in the Championship. Now, this gets interesting. Scottish football. There's no Scottish clubs in the English league system. And I've been asked to do a video on whether Rangers and Celtic could join the English league system. It won't happen, but the likelihood. So we have 4 devolved governments in the UK, technically, because the Westminster Parliament controls everything, but also England. And then you have devolved councils and mayor like London and Manchester have their own mayors and everything. It gets a bit complex, but there's devolved government from central government. So it is sort of similar to the German system. If Scotland say, no, we can't have any public gatherings, we're going to go with our health advice because that's part of their remit, Scottish football will stop, which looks very likely because the lower leagues in Scotland there's pressure on the Scottish Premiership just to declare, and they can work out whether to give Celtic the title because of remaining games and rough strength of schedule and relegate Hearts. And then you've got to look at English football. Now, Cardiff and Swansea and Newport play in the Football League, and Wrexham have already had their season declared. So Wrexham play in the conference. That's already been declared, season void. Newport, Swansea and Cardiff play in the Football League. They haven't voided or cancelled the rest of their season yet or declared their season yet. So if the Welsh Assembly go, no more public gatherings, you've got 3 clubs in the English Football League that are Welsh that could say, well, we can't play games at home. We can't play all of our games. Our players who live in Wales, we're told to still self-isolate. So we can't even play games away from home because we're a non-essential service. We're a non-essential business. We haven't been given permission. We have to stay in. And then that completely throws a spanner in the works of the Football League. So when you're saying when the Premiership will restart, it does depend on a lot of things. And you could have Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, who I think is an absolute tool, but he's still an elected official, even though I think he's more of a muppet than Boris Johnson. I think he's a muppet as well. He could say, London, we're still putting these lockdown measures in place. Now, bearing in mind, nearly half the Premier League play in the southeast or London. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Manchester, who's not a tool, he's a more sane politician, he could say the same about Manchester. He could say, we have got some devolved powers, we're not comfortable with public gatherings, still have a lockdown. I think Sheffield have got a mayor as well, and Sheffield United play in the Premiership. Then it becomes a bit more of a headache. So you have to have a universal kind of political, you're right, okay, we're relaxing these measures or allowing behind closed doors, and they have to follow strict guidelines. There are discussions in place between the sports authorities and the government about the possibility of getting professional sport restarted, but it won't be until mid-May, June at the earliest, I wouldn't have thought, which is still within the remit of UEFA getting all leagues started by the 30th of June, but the Dutch have already gone, nah, sod it, we're not interested. So it does raise questions about, the possibility. There's still a lot of unknowns, and we have to see how the German situation unfolds if that's a blueprint to go for. And that does come down with Merkel having meetings with the 16 German state leaders in the coming days. And if I think the state of Germany that I was born in, which is Rhine-Westphalia, which is near the Dutch border, they're in favour. That's where Dortmund is based. They're in favour of getting going. Bavaria, where Munich and a few other teams are based, again in favour of getting going. The other 14 states, unknown. And if the majority of German states saying no, that makes it a bit more problematic and a logistical nightmare. So I think there's still some vague. We have to see what happens with Germany as the example. Italy, where I've got players back in training preparation, but again, you look at their death toll; it's terrifying. You look at the infection toll; it's generally quite terrifying. So again, it's question mark. We know the first start date that we definitely know is going ahead is the NRL on the 28th of May. I think that's too soon, but we will see what Australian Rugby League does. Bearing in mind they've confirmed this, and then Todd Greenberg within a week quits. So the NRL, much like Rugby Australia, the sports governance in Australia is in a right mess. Two CEOs, two of the big sports in Australia, have quit a week apart. So Australian sports governance is an absolute shambles. There's question marks about the ECB's governments here in England, shambles. And there's a lot of headlines coming out about mismanagement, lack of transparency, dodgy dealings, about a lot of sports governance that would have got away with their poor governance if the money was still coming in. I still think the NRL are taking a big gamble, but and being less flexible by putting down a definite start date that reduces flexibility if the situation changes. And how they're going to do it, how they're going to test players, how they're going to keep players isolated. Because we know rugby league players, like English football players, tend to misbehave even when there isn't a lockdown. So you can just imagine the carnage that's going to unfold. You can just imagine the carnage that will unfold with NRL players. I think it is a bit too soon, but at the same time, they're obviously having regular dialogue with the state governments of Queensland, New South Wales, Canberra, the Australian Capital Territory, and the state government of Victoria. And they're obviously having discussions with New Zealand, because obviously the New Zealand Warriors based in Auckland. So there's clearly discussions taking place. That's why they went for if the weather is getting colder in Australia, it is your flu season sort of starting up. This is why Queensland was considered as a neutral location where they will play in a more warmer climate. So Townsville would be a good location to actually play games. Would be Townsville in the new stadium. That would be a great location because it's one of the warmest places in Australia all year round. But yes, Australia's entering its flu season. But again, the state and territory governments are, negotiating with the national government of is it Morrison, who's a bit of a hopeless prime minister, to be honest. And then they're they're having discussions with the NRL, but the NRL got no leader at the moment. They've got a temporary stand-in CEO after Todd Greenberg's gone. So again, really interesting to see what's going to happen. A lot of question marks there. Do I want sport to return? Absolutely, but it has to be done safely, and we have to consider that fans won't be in attendance for a very long time. Very long time. I think the earliest that we're going to see fans allowed back inside arenas and stadiums would be October. And the NRL have said we are going to lose money if we can't get fans in. If we don't play any games, we go bust. Done a video on that. Discussed it. I mean, the losses that the NRL are predicting are terrifying. They are terrifying. But oh god, yeah, Morrison is hopeless. He's not as bad as some. Well, I would think he's better than Tony Abbott, and which is not hard. I've been following Australian politics for like 20 years. It's hilarious how prime ministers don't survive terms because members of their party overthrow them. It's just like, oh, yeah, I think Australia's gone through a lot. the bushfires, the heavy rains, and now the virus. It's been a horrible year for Australia. But on a sporting side of things, the AFL and the NRL have to really consider how they go about getting their seasons restarted. There's a large amount of players in both the AFL and the NRL. A lot of players. They are contact sports. They are heavily reliant on fans going to games. So fans not being able to go to games is going to mean they take a hit. They are salary cap sports. So players' salaries will be affected on fans not being able to go to games this season or for part of the season. So it's going to be interesting to see the financial outlook going forward and the structures going forward. And it's going to be interesting to see if the NRL, May 28th, if that is set in stone or if they do move it again. If they move it again, by setting a date in stone has decreased their flexibility, because then the TV companies such as the Nine Network and Fox are going, right, we're going to start preparing our staff to, get ready for these games, get the broadcast unit set up, and then that puts other people at risk of catching the virus. So by not allowing that flexibility, it does then cause problems down the line, and we'll have to see what happens. But I'm looking forward to the NRL coming back, because that means I can get my NRL subscription over here in the UK sorted out to watch games, because I'm not going to pay for games that I can't see. So I'm going to pay my money and get my NRL subscription over here on the internet sorted out. It only costs me £120 a year, which is a lot cheaper than having a TV subscription, I can assure you that. And that means I can watch the games whenever I want, rather than having to be up middle of the night. Oh yeah, I think the issue is over here in the UK, the rights are held by Sky for the NRL, which is a problem because I don't have it. But the Watch NRL website is cheaper than getting a Sky Sports subscription, which, as I'm living with my family again, they're anti-Murdoch to the extreme. Yeah, that is an issue with people buying sports subscriptions, and they're not happy with the fact that sports are not being played and want their money back. And the Americans are stupid because they like suing people, and the sports companies, sports broadcast companies, the TV firms are bricking it quite badly, and it's a difficult one. This is why the subscription sports model is heavily flawed, and free to air is less flawed but has less money. Sports have got very, very greedy, and they have taken advantage of the fan. What I find really interesting is, even though we still have this ultra capitalist sports subscription model, we were told that would protect ticket prices and keep them low. So if the Premier League can make all this money off the TV, and research showed that in good times they could have let us in for less than £10 or for free into stadiums, why is it then that they can justify season tickets being £1,500 at Arsenal, for example, on average? How can they justify £77 away tickets? So the clubs claiming that, they could let us in for free. They could, but they choose not to. Has, really taken the piss out of fans. I'm happy to go to a sport like ice hockey in this country, which doesn't have the vast TV revenue that football does, and pay 10, 20, 30 quid for a ticket. I'm happy to do that, because I know that the budgeting and the finances are not there. They are heavily reliant on gate receipts. Now, football makes most of its money off TV. Yet the TV is not accessible for everyone in this country, for via economic reasons or personal reasons. They choose not to have Sky and BT. For us, it's a personal reason and an economic one as well. We just cannot afford it, and we don't like Murdoch. We don't like BT, even though we're BT shareholders. We're not happy with BT Sport. We're not paying for this crap. Why should we have to prop up a failing TV arm of the company? And so half the households in the UK don't have a sports subscription package. They refuse, either economically or for personal reasons. They don't want one. This is where the argument for free-to-air or internet streaming, which is cheaper, comes in, like YouTube or other video sharing websites comes in. And this is where Free Sports has made a massive gain in the market for new viewers and unique viewers. Premier Sports, much cheaper on the subscription, but you have to have a Sky package to get Premier Sports, which I think is wrong. I think Premier Sports, you should have it on Freeview or FreeSat, where the channel's already tuned in and you unlock it for $7.99 a month, personally. So already we are seeing issues with the subscription TV market, and with people demanding their money back, they're going to have less money going forward. We could see record numbers of people out of work after this, like record numbers of people unemployed. They're not going to have the money to pay for all these subscriptions. But the cancellation fees are pretty abhorrent as well, and disgusting. And in my view, frankly unacceptable. Frankly unacceptable. I think I think BT Sport and Sky Sports could both, I wouldn't say Sky Sports will go bust, but it'll make massive losses and have to rethink its strategy of reaching an audience. And yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Football has gone ridiculous, and it's trying to turn itself into something like the NFL and the NBA and Major League Baseball, to a certain extent NHL, where ticket prices. Have you seen ticket prices for like NFL games and NHL games? Toronto, to get a ticket in Toronto to see the Maple Leafs play is near on impossible, because you've got to pay like $300 Canadian just for a regular season game. That's before even talking about playoffs if they make it there. It's a ludicrous amount of money, and yeah, fans have been taken advantage of, and all this commercial TV. We were told ticket prices would stay nice and low, and we have to keep fans come. That's why we have the 3 o'clock blackout. We have to have fans keep coming in the stadium. So if that's the reason why the FA Cup has got falling attendances and the League Cup no one turns up, that's why the lower leagues have declining crowd numbers. Because so what we've been told is a lie, and the clubs are ripping us off at the top level, and it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of unaccessibility. Yeah, people are still obsessed about football in this country. I think there's going to be we could see 30-40% of the football fan base turn against the sport if this carries on, because you look at how the players and clubs are basically acting over the wage situation with the PFA and the clubs. I think the players are in the right, but they've actually also lost support over the years because of what the wages they're getting. They basically damage their own reputation. Yes, they are the ones in the right saying we want our wages deferred, but unfortunately, their obscene wage demands and some of their antics during lockdown by some of these players. I don't know why, rugby players, rugby league players, ice hockey players, tennis players, golfers, other sports, they behaved exemplary during this lockdown period. Football players, you can actually name, a full squad pretty much of players who have actually misbehaved. And some of them quite severely. I mean, Kyle Walker, sorry, I think he's done as a Man City player. You have to actually read the articles about what he got caught doing. And he put it on social media. It wasn't as if he kept it pretty hush-hush and had a couple of hookers over. No, he actually put it on social media that he was partying with sex workers and drugs and all that. Moises Keane, same thing, went to a house party. Well, actually hosted a rather loud party at his apartment, put it on social media. So it wasn't as if these guys were being subtle. And it wasn't if these guys were caught out by members of the public on social media breaching lockdown. They put it on their own social media accounts. They really are clowns. And then you have, Jack Grealish, club captain of Aston Villa, ploughing his Range Rover into his teammate's car after being at a house party. Absolute bellend. I have no sympathy for football players at the top level, on the top flight. I have sympathy for the lower league and non-league players, absolutely. One of my old neighbours, when I was growing up, used to play for Farmer and Stevenage and Northampton Town in the lower leagues and non-league. I have sympathy for the lower league players, absolutely. I've worked with some non-league players who have full-time jobs, and then they go and play, in the non-league. Um, I, I've, I, I've worked with semi-professional darts players, semi-pro rugby players, be it league or union, who by day work in warehouses, factories, farm labourers. By night or on the weekends, their days off or their evenings, they're training in the evenings, and then on the weekends, they're playing games. They could get severely injured, and then that affects their full-time job. So I have a lot of sympathy for ice hockey players and rugby union, rugby league players, especially at the lower levels. Um, those struggling on the individual sports like tennis, golf, darts, snooker, who are only semi-professional. They haven't hit the full professional ranks. They do have regular jobs to supplement their income. Top flight football, no sympathy for them, none, because too many on a regular basis keep acting, as you say, like Clown FC. It really is. It's not as if, for example, because they're so obsessed by social media and their own image, and they're so egotistical. It is Clown FC. It is absolutely Clown FC, and it should. And these guys are getting paid silly money, and some of them have the cheek. And I keep using Danny Rose, have the cheek to say, "Oh no, no, 50 grand a week. I want more than that. I want double that." Firstly, he's won no trophies with any of the clubs he's been at. And secondly, he's an overrated player. I mean, yeah, he's better skill wise than me. Um, he obviously far better than me. I mean, he'll probably skin me and score a hat trick. But I will say this: 50 grand a week, mate. After tax, he's still got 25 grand a week. What he earns in a week will take me a year with every available overtime to earn before tax. So I have no sympathy for him when he has a whinge. I have no sympathy for him. If he was on 25, 50 grand a year after tax, yeah, we can sit down and go, right, you're an average bloke, then you've got rent to pay or mortgage to pay, bills to pay. I can have a chat with them then. You're more down to earth then. When you're saying that what I earn in a year, right, will take me 2 years with every overtime available, you earn in a week, that's not enough for you. There's 52 weeks in a year, mate. I find that disgusting. And this ain't me being a champagne socialist or anything like that. This is me going, that to me is someone out of touch with the society they live in. And yeah, he has raised questions about the racism side of things, and I completely am on his side with that. But when he says I can blow 40 grand in a weekend, it's no bother to me, when he's talking about fines for racism or homophobia in the sport, that to me says, well, you undermine the argument of bringing in stricter punishments for racism and homophobia in the sport, because you're saying, oh yeah, the fine, no, I can spend that in a weekend. It does show that he's still out of touch with mainstream society. Because if I could blow 40 grand in a weekend, yeah, I would. But guess what? I can't even afford to blow 50 quid this weekend, because I'm trying to save up to find a place to live. I've got bills to pay. I've got my finance on my motorcycle to pay off, which will actually hit my credit rating if I pay it off early. There is an early cancellation fee, and that is a concern that I have to weigh up. I've had to cancel my holiday this summer because of this virus, so I've had to cancel all my plans, and which ironically we hadn't booked anything, but I was saving up for that. I've now got to put that money into helping my family get through this crisis. Uh, you know, Prices are going up for certain items at the supermarket. I do not have 50 grand a week to go, yeah, okay, or after tax 25 grand a week or thereabouts to fall back on. And the fact a player like that is saying, "Oh, that's not enough to live on," is actually quite sick. It's quite sickening that, okay, what are you spending your money on? Okay, I know it's your wages, and if you do pay your tax in full, then you can spend your money on whatever you want. But if you're saying, oh, I can't live on 50 grand a week, I need 100, that to me is quite damning of the modern football player at the top level. If we're talking about League One, League Two, non-league, then I have some sympathy for them going, yeah, I'm only on 400 quid a week. Okay, all right, I'm on what? I'm on what? If I play all the overtime, do all the overtimes. Okay, I'm nearly I'm nearly earning the same amount as a League Two football player on average. I can understand their concerns and their frustrations and their worries. But no, the top flight, and they're digging their heels in when their colleagues in the lower leagues are facing losing their jobs. and a lot of them didn't do very well at school. So this is their career. This is their chosen career path, is sport, and they're risking being laid off and losing their jobs and not necessarily having a club to go back to if things carry on. Clubs said we will go out of business. So the top level do need to help out their colleagues at the bottom levels of professional football. Otherwise, the sport itself will kill itself. And the greed of the top flight football player, and to a certain extent, the championship football player, is just astonishing to me how selfish and greedy and out of touch they really are. And even if they want to protect their full wages and defer them, they go, "Oh, we're helping the NHS." Great, great. Quite a few of them don't pay their taxes because they have some very, very interesting schemes to avoid paying tax, which, yeah, they're very coy about mentioning. When they get caught out, they're like, "Oh no, I pay my taxes." Do you? So I'm a bit skeptical of top flight football players. We know when players get caught out, they um, avoid criminal sanction by just paying the fine, and it's often a lot less than the tax they've avoided as well because they're wealthy. Um, that's my opinion on the whole situation. I've lost a lot of sympathy for Premier League football players, especially when you look at the NRL. And the players in the NRL took a blanket 75%. They're thinking 75% wage cut so the sport could survive. 75%. Bearing in mind, the next day it was discovered that £10 million or $10 million, sorry, of their retirement fund had been misappropriated by the NRL, and it wasn't where it should have been. That's the difference in sports. You look at rugby league. Yeah, there's some well-paid players in the NRL and Super League who earn multi-million contracts. But when the wealthiest players and the poorest players are going, we'll all take a 75% pay cut so we can protect club staff jobs. We can protect the backroom staff. We can protect the club's integrity going forward and make sure the club survives. We'll take a massive hit on our salaries going forward for a while in order for the sport to actually survive. That tells you the moral character, even though there's a lot of idiots in the NRL and Super League who regularly misbehave. And we've seen a lot of these players who do misbehave. But even then, it shows they have more moral fibre than their counterparts in professional European football across the board. It's stunning that a lot of these players who are taking these wage deferrals or salary cuts are doing it for the PR effect because they're still going to get paid mega bucks later down the line, and a lot of them don't pay their taxes. As we found out with Ronaldo, Messi, Mascherano, Xabi Alonso, a whole host of others in Spain who avoided paying the Spanish tax man a lot of money over like the last decade or so when they were really at their most successful. So it's interesting when you look at it and you break it down and a lot of them are doing it for the look at me attention seeking PR exercise to get the fans on board and keep the fans on board, because what we have seen is fans have been very critical. A lot of fans have said, right, I'm not coming back to support this sport. My money's going elsewhere. Now, whether they actually put their money where their mouth is and vote with their wallets and their feet post lockdown, and when fans are allowed back in attendance, and when games are back on TV and the leagues restart, be it they complete this season or they just go, right, this season's done, we're going to focus on next season, is a wait and see thing. But it it does really piss me off when players are trying to justify their stupid wages and say, I want more money. Clearly, they are not living in the real world. And when they're digging their heels in over wage cuts or deferrals, and the clubs as well, it really shows the divide that's going to be there. But then both the clubs and players are losing sympathy from the wider public and the fans. Fans are like, yeah, I'm on an 80% furlough scheme. I'm barely making mortgage payments. I can't feed my family. I could lose my job. It's that kind of thing. Now, I'm a key worker, so I've still got to go to work. And in each country, key workers are vary. But I basically under I come under the utilities technically because I'm waste disposal. So I have to keep going to work. I actually already have a very dangerous job, but it actually gets more dangerous with this virus. I have to keep going to work. I have a full week next week. Our days are getting longer. We're finishing later than we normally do. And one of our neighbouring boroughs, who were run by the same company, they're doing 12, 14 hours days on the bins, and they're coming in, and the waste they're disposing of, the amount, because they have a higher population where they work, it's insane. It's not sustainable. We have staff shortages. We have the sickness list at my. If you were to come into my depot and look at the amount of sick, I think on my section of our depots, I think 30 or 40 people, we had 16 off on one day out of 40. That's nearly a third of our workforce is going down sick at the moment. So yeah, there are worries going forward about staffing and keeping the service going, and making sure that we are able to maintain a safe service. It's not fun, and with no sport to actually take our minds off things, and then no entertainment venues like cinemas and bowling alleys open. So when you get off work, you're knackered, but you want to unwind. There's nothing to unwind with. It does become a little bit frustrating, but I'd rather that more people didn't die, personally. For me, I'm seeing more deer. I'm seeing more foxes, deer, badgers, rabbits, hares. I've actually seen some weasels and stoats. Now, weasels and stoats are very, very, I wouldn't say shy animals, but they're very stealthy animals because of their ambush predators. When you're seeing creatures like animals like that generally generally don't see, because they come out at night, or the noise disturbs their hunting, and they I'm seeing a lot more rabbits, a lot more deer. So wildlife, yes, I've seen a lot of deer. I'm not seeing like goats and sheep, because the area that I work in isn't as rural as other parts of the UK. We do have a agricultural sector in the southeast of England, but a lot of the farms are well run. They have smaller sheep herds and cattle herds, and there's a lot of equine farms. There's a lot of horses. And there's a lot of horse race training that takes place, and horse race breeding that takes place in the area that I work in. And we regularly, go on the farms and collect their household waste and stuff. And we get to know the farmers and the horse trainers and stuff like that. I wouldn't say I've seen more sheep just wandering in the road, but I have seen definitely more wildlife, like deer and rabbits and foxes, badgers. We are seeing more of that. Does that become a road hazard? Yeah, a little bit. When you've got I've seen muntjac deer, red deer, roe deer. Yeah, I've spotted the spotted like Bambi deer. I forget what they're called. I've seen a lot of them. The muntjac deer is the weirdest one because it has tusks down here. I've seen one of them literally run alongside our truck up this country lane, and it was a male one as well. So, and it was and it's a small deer, but it's still, yeah, it's still something. But the southeast of England's quite a busy area, and the area I work in, the geographical area, is quite urbanised. Even though it has a lot of countryside, it's still a couple of big towns right on top of each other. So even so, there's still a lot of traffic. That's still keeping, I think, a lot of the wildlife away. But in more rural areas, I'm seeing, definitely more deer and foxes and badgers, weasels, stoats, rabbits, hares. So the risk of us hitting a deer is actually ironically increased. But there's still a fair bit of traffic and a fair bit of human activity. So unfortunately, I don't get to see as much wildlife as I would like. But there is definitely, I've seen more of it. I think that's something that actually happens when you have less people about. It's the wildlife takes over a little bit because they get less disturbed. I think I've seen a lot of cyclists. I class them as wildlife because a lot of them don't know the road traffic laws. They really piss us off because they get in our way and they actually are a danger to themselves and others. Um, and that brings us to another point: the Tour de France. Is that going to take place this year? We've seen the Giro and the Vuelta pretty much, written off for the year. So getting back on sport, cycling that's taken a hit. There are calls to broaden cycling and make the global cycling less reliant on the Tour de France. If that is the case, you've got to open up the TV rights a bit more, make more events, pay more when it comes to the other tours, including the other two Grand Tours. And again, stop doping and cheating. It's plain and simple. Um, Cyclista Helmeta. Yes. Road cycling. If there's an event going on in a cycle race, and I've seen a few cycle races, in including amateur and professional, both in England and across Europe when I've been in Europe. Yeah, I'm more than happy if it's a registered event and they've shut the road off and you have to wait until the cycle passes. Fine, crack on. When a lot of these amateur cyclists really don't know road traffic laws, and a lot of them have only just taken the bike out of the shed for the first time in 20 years. You can tell they're not confident on the bike. They're it's they're very sloppy in their cycling style. They are just a pain, and I've never seen so many cyclists and joggers, and a lot of these people haven't been doing exercise for years, and they suddenly, oh yeah, I'm on lockdown, I can't do anything. I've got an hour's exercise. I'm gonna get the bike out the shed, or I'm gonna get the running gear out, and then actually become more of a hazard to themselves and others than they were when they weren't exercising. It's unreal. Cyclists, especially, a lot of them shouldn't be cycling on the road. They're just not competent enough or safe enough doing it. It's just frustrating to the extreme. But it's going to be interesting to see how the sport of cycling recovers from this lockdown and um, the lack of cycling, because what has been proved is global cycling is heavily reliant on the Tour de France, to a certain extent the Giro and the Vuelta as well, overly reliant on the three Grand Tours, especially the Tour de France, and the minor tours and the regional races and the one-day classics don't bring in the revenue, and unfortunately they're going to have to look at restructuring how cycling is funded, the prize money for the other events, the sponsorship for the other events, the TV rights for the other events, the accessibility, and professional cycling's got to look at itself. But the problem is with professional cycling is there's still people blood doping and taking steroids and cheating, and it's got an image as a sport where does it have integrity? That's where cycling has definitely fallen down in recent years. Is since the Lance Armstrong revelations, the integrity of cycling, that it just isn't there. So people are questioning Chris Froome. People are questioning, anytime anyone wins a tour race or a stage, they are questioning, is he clean? And Chris Froome is, there's still question marks about his integrity, and he doesn't quite get it. The criticism he faces, thank Lance Armstrong for that, and to a certain extent, the riders you came in the decade or two before as well. There is big question marks about the integrity of global cycling, and the questions are still going to be there, and they will continue to be there until, clean riders go on strike and refuse to ride, and then you might actually get some change, because a good percentage of the peloton is still doping, and they are still accepted back into the sport with open arms after their year or 2 year ban. They're still accepted back in, and when you've got is it Contador? Alberto Contador, who's failed, I think, 3 dope tests. He's welcomed back into the sport every time. He hasn't had any of his titles stripped. That completely undermines the sport's integrity going forward. If a guy has been banned for doping offences 3 times in his career and he's still welcomed back into the sport with open arms each time, it makes a mockery of the sport going forward. It really does. Absolutely. It completely undermines any integrity the sport has. And until, you know, someone's going to spill the beans on Chris Froome at some point, whether he's clean or dirty. And it wouldn't surprise me if it's an ex-teammate that has been thrown under the bus when it was Team Sky or Team Ineos. It will not surprise. Very similar to Lance Armstrong when he finally had to open up and admit his misdeeds because ex-teammates were basically who'd been thrown under the bus and sacrificed to make sure he kept winning these tour titles. Where they basically had enough and said, "Yeah, well, we're going to." After the Floyd Landis, an ex-teammate who then went to a different team, won the tour, found guilty of doping, thrown under the bus. Lance Armstrong made sure he was thrown under the bus. When he came out and said, "Well, check this guy out," putting some pressure on, more and more pressure on Lance Armstrong, where he had to defend himself. He lied in a federal court as well, and the more pressure built on Lance Armstrong, eventually he cracked and went, "Sod it, I'm going to have to come clean," because he'd thrown too many people under the bus. It's going to happen with Chris Froome, I have no doubt. Someone is going to say what actually goes on at Team Sky, Team Ineos. And when that all comes out, I tell you now, the damage to cycling will probably be bigger because people have been questioning Chris Froome's integrity since his first tour win. And that's the base of the whole last decade. Any doesn't matter if it's a one-up, well, like Nibali or Wiggins winning only a couple of tours, Grand Tours or whatever, or Froome winning multiples. They're going to go, really? Anyone who wins a stage now in the Tour de France, they're questioning the integrity of their athlete. And that shouldn't be the case, but it is. Cycling is riddled with integrity issues, absolutely riddled. And we're gonna see some massive upheaval come from it, and I think it could be even more damaging than the Lance Armstrong admission of industrial cheating on a scale that nearly matches the state-sponsored doping programs of the Cold War, and that's the problem. It's not as if pro cycling is the wealthiest sport in the world where they earn big mega bucks. It really isn't. And question marks have been raised about the integrity of rugby union, rugby league, football. Iannone, the motorcyclist, has been banned for drug use. Anthony West banned for drug use. Even motorcyclists in superbikes and MotoGP are facing lengthy bans for taking illicit and performance enhancing drugs. It's not just a cycling or an athletics problem. It's a much wider issue within sport, and I'm surprised that like the NHL hasn't had more players fail dope tests. There are a couple who are on doping bans right now whose careers are done at the NHL level. He might go back to Europe to play, but there's a couple. I'm surprised there's not more. The bigger issue with the NHL, I think, is recreational drug misuse. We know cocaine, ecstasy, cannabis, ketamine. There is an issue with abuse, and the testing system is hopelessly flawed by the amount of times they test you. They have to test you twice compulsory in a year, once in pre-season, once in regular season, and the majority of tests are done before Christmas. So the NHL and ice hockey in general needs to up its testing game for recreationals as well as performance enhancing. Same with rugby league and rugby union. There is a growing trend of recreational drug misuse in league and union, and that's been highlighted in the last 2-3 years with several high-profile incidents in 2017 involving high-profile players in both the Super League and the NRL. And while they may not be household names outside rugby league fandom necessarily, some of them are. And when you've got a sport that is a bit niche, I suppose, in a way, and has a smaller fan base and less money than, let's say, other sports in countries. So in the NRL in Australia is got a bigger fan base than the Super League in England, for example. But they're not the biggest supported sport in their country. They're not the best supported sport in their country that they play. And when you've got high-profile players within that sport, getting caught doing things they shouldn't, failing drugs tests or getting caught with recreationals or, it does raise a lot of questions about what, and this is the problem. His players do misbehave a lot, and yeah, that's an issue. Cadel Evans, yeah, you have to ask questions about every single cyclist in the ground in professional cycling, which is a shame because I know about 80% of them are clean, maybe 90% now. So the doping and the cheating is a lot less. However, the questions are still there. And when you're asking about a great like Cadel Evans, he hasn't quite reached the heights of that he should have possibly, but he's a very good cyclist, winning stages and competing in the Tour de France and the Giro, the Vuelta, and he's a top level cyclist and he's a national treasure of Australia. When you're raising questions about Cadel Evans, that is a shame, but I think he's actually clean. I think he's generally a clean athlete, and I think he's had, more bad luck than being cheated out of anything because he keeps crashing. I think luck has let him down in his quest for a tour title, but I think he's actually clean. But you can definitely see the difference between Contador doping and Contador clean. He is nowhere near as good when he's been clean. But when he was in those periods he was doping, you can definitely see an improvement in performance. But no, the questions will still be there. The until enough clean cyclists threaten to strike or basically protest at the start of a stage of the Tour de France, no change will take place. There will still be it will still be there, and that's the problem. It's a sport that's got weak integrity, and unfortunately, it's not winning back the integrity, fighting and earning the respect back. And the problem is, it keeps allowing cheaters back multiple times after they've been banned. Contador is the example, or the dopador, if we should call him that. Alberto Contador has, doped so many times. He's been let back in to global cycling so many times. It makes a mockery of the system. It does, and then you have to question his teammates, his compatriots, and then you have to question the sport. You do. And when you got Marco Pantini in the past, a great in the 90s. I think the last guy to win the Tour de France before Lance Armstrong. And his untimely death and the question marks surrounding his passing and the doping that he admitted to. He admitted to it. And the Festina scandal of '98, which basically brought the sport to its knees. It does raise questions. That in 20 years, has the sport changed that much? Really? Has the sport really turned it around? Because we've had, basically 3-4 decades of rampant cheating, and yeah, you could say there's some blackballing. Floyd Landis got thrown under the bus, and he could never resurrect his career after his ban, and they gave him a lengthier ban. And then he was one of the reasons why Lance Armstrong came clean, because the pressure that Floyd Landis threw back, and the questions he raised when he was banned. He gave interviews where he said, you know what, you might want to check out this guy called Lance, because he was doing it. A guy called Lance, quite an important cyclist. He was doing it industrially long before I was in the sport, whilst I was in the sport, and basically threw me off his team because I refused to keep doing it. And he's the reason why I got banned. And when you have, Floyd Landis, the situation in 2006, that breaks the mystique of Lance. He then comes clean. But then you have to look at other sports as well. I've been going on that cycling now for a little bit, but global cycling definitely needs to really be more transparent. It needs to have lengthier bans for the dopers. Stop allowing them back in with open arms. They have to really become shitty with them, I think. And then you have to look at the teams they race for and how many cyclists fail drugs tests on those teams. And then I'll take away the operating license. Do I think the EIHL should be expanded? Interesting one. You've got to make sure that the running costs and the teams that you expand to can meet the running costs and be financially viable. I think, yeah. Would I like to see teams like Peterborough and Bracknell and Hull play in the Elite League? Yes, I think that would be a great addition. But Milton Keynes tried, failed. Basingstoke tried in the past and failed financially, ruined them financially. Guildford and Bracknell were approached when the Elite League was set up, and they said no 15, 16 years ago. So it took a long time for Guildford to come round to the idea, and whether Bracknell and Hull and Peterborough do warm to it, we'll have to wait and see. I think the sport in this country, Great Britain, has shown massive growth in the last 10 or so years. Massive growth. We've seen a massive improvement in the national side. We've seen more kids take up the sport, more amateurs, play rec hockey in the summer and then the beer league type, in the winter. So there's clearly growing interest, growing fandom. People are enjoying it. They're buying into it more. So there is growth there, but it has to be sustainable. Do I think it should be expanded? Yes. Will it get expanded? We'll have to wait and see what happens post this economic downturn and downswing, because this is a sport that is heavily reliant on gate receipts at all levels. Heavily reliant on fans going to games. So while I would like to see the Elite League expanded and a better, more accessible TV deal, again, it has to be sustainable. It has to be thought out. It has to be, sustainable financial planning in place. It has to be competitive as well. It can't be the same teams winning every year. So that has to be something that has to be considered. And it has to be sustainable for the teams where they expand to. And they have to make sure that all the teams meet the financial viability for the league to be financially viable. For then any TV deal to be beneficial and better accessibility. It's vitally important that they get everything right. But we're going to see changes with the overseas players. We're going to see changes to the import rule of how many overseas players a team can have because of the financial constraints and the economics and the politics behind Brexit, things like that. So post this lockdown and when we have fans back in attendance and when sport can resume, which I would think would be in the autumn, I would think it's going to be interesting to see, the direction British ice hockey takes, be it the Elite League or the National League below. Very interesting to see the direction the sport takes. Sheryl Crow, a lot of these celebrity couples, a lot of it doesn't make any much sense to me. But they all live in their own little bubble of not really being in touch with the rest of the world. But Lance Armstrong comes across as a bit of a thicko, really. Actually, surprisingly, for someone who got away with it so long, I wouldn't have said. I don't know why he broke his silence. Obviously, pressure was mounting and rumours were circulating. But this is why I say when people say, "Oh, this person belongs in this sport Hall of Fame," or "This person, is the best player ever." Wait till they retire. Wait till things come out about what they were like and their reputation then. And then decide if they belong in a sports Hall of Fame or deserve a statue outside a stadium or anything like that. Because people idolised Lance Armstrong for a decade, and it turns out he's not what he was. There are certain. I mean, look, you have to look at the sports that people play, and it's what is played at school and university. and at grassroots community level. And ice hockey there's a lot of ice rinks, so there's clearly an appetite for skating. There's clearly an appetite for the sport because the facilities are there across the country. There are loads of ice rinks across the country, loads. When it comes to things like basketball, and we've discussed this, and handball and volleyball, there are less facilities. There's less interest to do with school PE lessons, and in the wider clubs and associations and leagues, there's less interest. There's just less interest. But when you look at things like field hockey, ice hockey, football, rugby, both kinds, cricket, they're played at school or university level. There are, grassroots clubs. There are fully professional clubs. There's professional leagues. There's TV deals for all these leagues. We are reasonably good at international level for the level that we play at. So, yes, it could be more national, but we do have a national. I mean, the one problem is we don't have a top flight team in London. That's what strikes me. We have teams in London and the Great London area, Greater London, but we don't have a London insert team name here. We don't have a London Royals, for example, or whatever, or we could call them the London Dockers, because you obviously had the Docks on the East End and the Isle of Dogs. We don't have a London team when it comes to Elite League or National League. We don't have a London team. So that in itself is an issue. We've had a London team in the past, but it's not only making sure, okay, you can have a London team, for example. The fact that at lower levels of the sport, at National League level, there's multiple teams in the Greater London area. Could you get are there enough fans who will go, I will identify with London, or as we've seen with rugby and football, okay, I identify with the borough of London I live in, or the area. So I'm a Chelsea fan, I'm an Arsenal fan, I'm a Harlequins fan. We won't talk about Saracens, but I'm a Wasps fan. Back in the day, I'm London Welsh, London Irish, because of the area of London that this team plays in. That's the interesting thing about London, is there is no one team at professional level that attracts. It's all parts of London. So Arsenal, Tottenham, Palace, Charlton Athletic, Millwall, West Ham, Leyton Orient. I'm listing off football league clubs here, and rugby league. You've got London Scholars and London Broncos. You've only got two rugby league teams, but they don't play in the same stadium. They play in different parts of London. And they have different fans. So, and then when you look at ice hockey, you've got Streatham, Redhawks. You've got the Raiders, who technically play in Romford, which is technically Essex, although they have played in Lee Valley, which is technically part of Greater London near Enfield. You've got Lee Valley Lions. You have Invicta, which technically is Gillingham, although they do play technically on the edge of the M25. So there, you've automatically got a limited amount of ice hockey rinks inside or on the edge of Greater London. And once you get outside the M25, that's where the teams start appearing. So you have the Guildford Flames, you have your Bracknell Bees, you have your Peterborough Phantoms, you have your Milton Keynes Lightning, and then you have your further afield, you've got your Swindon Wildcats, and then you get up to the Midlands, and then you get Nottingham Panthers, and you get your Sheffield Steel, and there are more rinks and teams away from London. I don't know how many ice rinks are actually in London, but there's a limited number of teams already in London, and this is where there are plans on the table to have a KHL franchise in London, but you don't really have do you have the fan base in London for ice hockey? Is there an NHL fan base there? Is there just a general love for the sport? Now, from what I've seen, the teams that play in London have a very limited fan base. So I am questioning, why hasn't the Elite League? I'm assuming the Elite League has done its due diligence and looked at it. But you notice that the teams that the Elite League has, apart from the odd exception, were already existing teams from the existing league structures that were in place. They went with existing locations when they set up the Elite League. Now, London doesn't have a London insert team. It's just The local areas of London have teams, and even then, they're not playing at uh, the second tier level. They're all playing in the National League at lower levels. There is no London-based team playing in the National League, which is the second tier or above. So it is interesting when you come to think of it, and when you look at the makeup of the GB national side, you have got players who've been brought up in the southeast. You have got players brought up in the Midlands. You've got players from Scotland. You've got players from Wales. You've got players from Northern Ireland. But there's not a single player who has come from a London background. So that is interesting in itself. You look at the breakdown of the teams these guys have played for, be it at the various semi-pro and pro levels before getting to the Elite League or overseas leagues where some of them do play. You look at that and you go, right, not a single one of them has played for a team or been developed through a youth system for a team in Greater London. So that does raise the question of should they put a team in Greater London? Is there the quality level there to have enough British players to make up the roster before the overseas players come in for an Elite League team or a National League team even? Because you've got the import rule. Can you actually get enough players of a decent enough standard to make the team competitive in whatever league you put it in? This is where the Edinburgh Capitals just fell apart because they were always one of the worst teams in the Elite League. This is where the Edinburgh Capitals folded. They just couldn't make any money and they only had, I think, 2 seasons making the playoffs. So it's all well and good saying we should have a team in London, we should have a team in this location. But you've got to have the fan base there and also the player base to attract local players, because otherwise you can't build that community kind of weird. Because London is an expensive city to live in. So if you're saying let's put a team in London, you have to look at the expense of it. The running costs are higher in London than outside. The living costs are higher than outside. If you're gonna try and attract players, their wages go further if they are playing in Sheffield or Nottingham or Guildford. Guildford not so much. Guildford's quite an expensive place to live, actually, ironically. But in theory, Guildford is cheaper than Greater London to live in. So when you've got a player who might be, brought through locally through the local system, or conversely, an overseas player, attracting to a city like London, it's really expensive. So you're going to have to actually pay them more, ironically, because of after tax, they actually earn less. Then, and after salaries and mortgages and bills, they actually ironically have less take-home pay. It's going to be more expensive for a team to hire a player in London because they have to pay him slightly higher in order to offset tax than and living costs than a team player who plays in Belfast or Glasgow or Cardiff, Manchester, where it's cheaper to live. The wages are very similar, but where it's cheaper to live, he actually gets more money in his pocket at the end of the day after tax and after bills and expenses. There you go. That's why London doesn't have a professional ice hockey team. It's why London doesn't have that many rugby league teams. Why? If you were to, the Elite League does have a salary cap of sorts. It has an overseas player cap. There are cost controls in place to make it a more competitive league. But you have to look at a whole variety of things. If you are to have a hard cap, you would have to have an exception for the London area, like a luxury tax instead. It does become difficult. Now, conversely, you look at the football teams that play in London as well, they tend to also have to pay more on average for their players at every level on contracts than their rivals outside London. So let's have a look at, let's say, something like Leyton Orient or Millwall, Charlton Athletic. You look at the leagues they're in and the rival teams who play outside London. They have to pay higher wages, not because the players are much better. It's because the living costs in London are so much higher that they have to pay that slightly extra bit more, not because of the tax rate being higher, but we're not even including council tax in this, and that is where London is expensive as well, as the council tax rates, the property prices, rents, everything is more expensive in London. Living costs. So salary, you can earn exactly the same amount in London as you would, let's say, in Bristol, for playing for Bristol City or Bristol Rovers, right? But Bristol is a much cheaper city to live in, and it's the West Country, so it's cheaper. Living costs are less, so the salary will actually go further. You can make your money go further for each pound you earn after tax. That pound will stretch further than in London. London doesn't go as far. So, ironically, it means you actually have to end up paying bigger salaries to your players, and you have to charge more for your tickets, and you have to pay your staff more in order to offset the higher taxes, the higher living costs, because I'm classing council tax in here, transport costs, food, drink, mortgages, rent, energy bills are higher in London as well, ironically, than a player based in Bristol or a player based in Southampton or Portsmouth or Bournemouth or Newcastle, Sunderland. It doesn't matter what sport, you have to then look at it. So further up north, if I was to do the same job, I'd earn exactly the same amount of money, but anywhere between £9 and £11 an hour. So I could be up somewhere in like Northumberland, Carlisle, doing the same job as I do down here. But out of every pound I earn after tax, it goes further. It's so much cheaper for rent, for bills, council tax up north, that I could be far better off doing exactly the same job. So I'm getting paid in real terms. Yeah, I'm not earning as much as I would up north in real terms because of the bills that I'm paying. So my council tax, my internet, my things don't go as far, because food costs, fuel costs, running costs of bits and pieces cost more in the south than in the north. That's another thing that is probably. I think they don't have a World Cup in ice hockey. They have the World Championships. They've done a few World Cups in ice hockey, and they've not really been sold as well. If they were to host the World, let's say Great Britain stay in the top flight of the World Championships, yeah, we have the rings to host the World Championships. Absolutely, that would be a massive boost to the sport. Massive boost if we were to host the World Championships. Switzerland, we're meant to have it this year. That's been pushed back a year. If we were to get World Championships in Great Britain, if Great Britain could keep their seat at the top table, and remain in the elite World Championship grouping, which is highly possible, then yes, we could earn the right to host. We do have arenas that are a decent size, like Belfast, Sheffield, Nottingham. We do have the arenas to do it. That would be a massive boost to the sport. Massive. Problem is, there's a promotion relegation system when it comes to the World Championships, and that has to be taken into consideration. So we have to maintain our spot and then kick on with the World Championship side. We have to maintain our position and then kick on to earn the right to host the top level World Championship ice hockey. Absolutely. Should they have a World Cup of ice hockey similar to rugby and rugby league and football, cricket? Yeah, I think so. I think they should. But at the same time, they've attempted several World Cups of hockey before, and not necessarily met with the success they were hoping for. But the World Championships is every year, and is the IIHF's biggest money earner. And unlike the Olympics, NHL players are eligible at this current time. Now, that's something that is on the debating table, is changed to Olympic participation on the professional sports side of things, like football, like rugby, like ice hockey. Should they relax the age restriction on Olympic football by a year, make it over under 24s rather than under 23s, because players are going to miss out? Do they allow NHL players to go back to the Winter Olympics, for example? That's on the debating table. Rugby union and things like that. that's interesting about the various players who play in that. So the professional team sports, when it comes to Olympics, there are debates about who can participate, who can't, etc. Makes it interesting. Makes it very interesting. But yes, on the ice hockey team, yes, we could host the World Championships, but it is wholly reliant on Great Britain maintaining its place at the top table of the IIHF World Championships. Now, that's the be all and end all. They have to maintain their place in the top division. If they slip out, then we won't be able to host it. Yeah, but the thing is with ice hockey, the quality level drops off quite dramatically the further down the rankings you go. Unlike football, where you can have a team ranked 50th in the world, win 1-0 against the top ranked team in the world because rankings are flawed. If you have a full strength Canadian team with all the NHL talent available against a full strength British team, yeah, it's 9, 10. If you play 100 matches, England, Great Britain might win 2. So the quality level does drop off quite significantly when you have a team full of NHLers, because the Russians, the Swedes, the Finns, so the big Scandinavian nations, the Czechs used to be able. You could actually have a full NHL team of Czech players. Back in the day, you could. I think you still can. Slovaks, not so much, but Czechs, you could have a full Czech team. Obviously, the US and the Canadians, if you had all their available players, NHL, that they could choose from, you would expect the Canadians to win 9 times out of 10. It's not always the case, but on paper. So if they had all the Connor McDavids and the Sidney Crosbys and the Mark Scheifele's of the NHL available for Canada, and you had the Patrick Kanes and of the US, all and the Hughes brothers, all available. And then you had the Pedersens and the Darlings and the Lundqvists for Sweden, all available, all fully fit. That's why a World Cup of ice hockey is sort of flawed, because the depth level just drops away. The top level talent, it just drops away. And yeah, you could argue some of the European leagues are quite skill based and they don't use NHL size rinks; they use Olympic size ice surfaces. That affects the style of play, and but the quality level is different. The NHL is there's a reason why the NHL is the league that every ice hockey player, when they first put on a pair of skates when they're a kid, goes, "I want to play in the NHL," because it is the pinnacle of the sport. Whether the KHL or some of the European leagues can close that gap and say, actually, we also have the highest quality, we shall see in time. But so the biggest salaries are paid out, highest quality facilities are played in, so arenas, and the best quality players, even the Europeans, NHL. So until Great Britain can get, let's say, 5 or 6 NHLers in their ranks, yes, they can definitely hold their place in the World Championships at the top table. We've proven that last year, proven that we can, because of the promotion relegation system. So the team that comes up is normally goes straight back down again. So it was a shock, but not overly surprising that we stayed up. But until Liam Kirk can break into the NHL and play games there, until other players get drafted by NHL teams, and until more homegrown talent can actually go, right, the elite league has improved to such a point, standard-wise and skill-wise, that other European leagues are looking at that talent going, right, we can, have that. And then the NHL guys will draft more players. Then, are China in the World Championships? The Chinese aren't in the World Championships, but they are obviously hosting the Olympics. Chinese aren't very good. But the Chinese, by winning the Winter Olympics, they have spent a lot of money on their ice hockey program. Lots of money. That's why there's a KHL team in Beijing. There's only one Chinese player playing in the KHL, but and to dubious levels of competence. But they put a lot of money into attracting investment. So they've had NHL pre-season. They've got a KHL team in Beijing, and they're pumping a lot of money into their ice hockey program. It doesn't mean they're going to be good overnight. It just means they're going to have quantity over quality. They won't be very, very good. They'll be like the Koreans in Pyeongchang. They will be absolutely hammered, slaughtered. They'll lose every game like 10-0. But they are investing a lot of money. And that's something that is starting to happen in the UK, but it's the team owners, it's the rink owners that are investing money. It's the teams saying, sign up. It's not the British government investing money. It's the individual private sector companies sponsoring teams. It's the teams themselves going, please become members of our ice hockey club. Feel free to sign up for skating lessons. Get your kids involved. So there is that to consider. But there's a lot of state involvement with China. Sport in China is a big political tool that they use. Hence why Beijing has got a second Olympics. It's something that the Chinese definitely use and have used very well to their advantage over the last 20 years. When they were awarded the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and they got the Winter Olympics in Beijing for 2022, they are using political funds and government funding, and they see sport as a soft power alternative to showcase modern China as a happy place. In reality, it's really not. But yeah, sport is used as a political tool by the Chinese very effectively. They put a lot of money in, and because they've seen how other neighbouring nations that are, well, not as restrictive as China, like Japan, like South Korea, had a football World Cup, have a Rugby World Cup in Japan. The Olympics being awarded to Japan with Tokyo, but Tokyo's had the Olympics several times before. Looking at India with the IPL cricket, that's a regional power that's also nuclear as well. And F1, then they both have F1 races on the calendar. And seeing how India have also used sport as a way to attract investment and interest, and then they can sell their product with the sponsorship of Indian companies. So this is where economics plays a part as well. And the Chinese middle class have a lot of money to spend. So overseas sponsors and investors are looking at having a way. Well, see, rugby's already got the Six Nations. That's the closest I think we're going to get, is the Six Nations. Same with rugby league. There isn't the talent depth outside the top nations in Europe for it to make logical sense. There isn't space on the international calendar. They would have to scrap the autumn internationals. They would have to scrap the summer tours down under, and they would have to rejig the calendar every second year like football does. And there isn't the player talent depth for rugby to go that way, and there isn't the finances. Because there'll be some really unequal contests which will do nothing to grow the sport. When you're playing, let's say England are playing Germany and the final result's like 120-0, that's going to do nothing for the German development. It's actually going to do nothing for England's squad development either. So no, I can't see it going that way, not for a very long time yet, possibly not even in our lifetimes. But we don't know what the sport's going to look like in 12 months with this current lockdown. We don't know what the outcomes of the World Rugby's election between Pichot and Beaumont's going to be. It's going to go down to the wire, absolutely. But some sources are saying Pichot's going to win by a vote. Some are saying Beaumont's going to win by a vote, and some are saying that there could be a swing from some of the Six Nations to Pichot, which could then swing it in his favor. It's all very close. There's a lot riding on this election, but we'll see what happens. I don't see rugby union having a Euros like football. Absolutely not. There isn't the player talent depth across Europe for that. There's only about 10 nations that in total that play in Europe that are competitive enough for some of the weaker nations to have competitive matches against each other, and then you've got the top tier 6. Italy will beat all the ones below every day of the week. Georgia might push Italy for 60 minutes, but then it's just two-tier competition, so it's not going to work. There isn't the player depth there. There isn't the talent depth, as I say. There isn't the finance, and then you would have to completely rejig the international calendar, which was rejected before the World Cup. So I don't see how you do it. I can't even see the Rugby World Cup going to 24 teams. I can't even see it expanding to that level. I can't. Because again, that means completely rejigging the international calendar. And I'm not sure. But we'll have to see what happens. It's a player welfare thing as well, because then you have to pack more games in a very short space of time. Does that mean you have bigger international squads? Does that mean more players can get selected? That then adds to the cost. So, again, really interesting. If it were to go ahead, it would have to increase the strain on logistics as well. It would mean more fans, absolutely, but again, there'd be some major mismatches there between top tier nations and tier two nations and the lower ranked nations. Absolute mismatches that would just be embarrassing, to be fair, and it would do nothing to develop the game for those nations getting battered 100-0, and it would do nothing for those players scoring 100 points. It would just do nothing. It would actually be more embarrassing than anything, and it would actually do more harm than good. That's my personal opinion. But that's where you need to grow the grassroots and grow the professionalism in these tier two and tier three nations to prevent that happening. But we'll have to see what happens. We have to take stock of where yes, what's happening with the Bury situation? That's interesting. And Bury FC going bust in August last year before this coronavirus. It just shows that football finances are in a mess, and that the current financial model that we have is unsustainable. And now that we have this crisis, it's highlighting the greed of the bigger clubs and football in general, and the governing bodies and UEFA and the TV companies, which is unsustainable. So we could see more clubs go out of business over the summer. We really could. And then that really throws everything into question about the integrity of the sport going forward. And yeah, the Football League could be a much different place, a more different place. Could look very different in August, September, November when football could resume. It could look completely different. We could definitely have less teams, and the Football League may have to completely restructure itself. We could, completely have different structures, and things could look absolutely completely differently to what they are now. I've got loads of notifications here. Oh God, loads of things going off. What's going off here? But yeah, the structures in place, the financial status of the game. My phone's been going mad. Just checking all my updates. But no, absolutely. Football has become overly reliant on TV money, and because there are some clubs that have had falling attendances for a variety of reasons, there's less gate receipts. So when the TV money, dries up, and there's less fans going to games, and Accrington Stanley said that when they missed out on the games against Bury, home and away, that cost them nearly £500,000 for both games. The home game itself cost them nearly £300,000 in lost revenue. And for a club like Accrington Stanley, one of the smaller budgeted clubs in the league, one of the smaller stadiums in the Football League, saying we've just lost out on that much revenue from not being able to play the game against Bury, which made the decision to not allow Bury to kick off the season even more bizarre by the EFL, and highlighted how stupid some of the rules are that are currently in place. One club going out of business has that knock-on effect for every other club in the league. Then, on top of that, more clubs go out of business. The surviving clubs will have less revenue going forward. So absolutely, the Football League does risk its integrity with this crisis. And the Premier League, the players and the clubs are just highlighting how greedy they are. And it's a thing. It is an ongoing issue that, absolutely has massive implications. And whether the new AFC Bury can get readmitted, or they have to go at the bottom of the Football League ladder and non-league ladder and work their way up, like other clubs have had to do. We shall see. But the whole situation was avoidable. Had they allowed Bury to play games, yes, they would have got relegated to League Two, but then some revenues could have been earned, and some of the debts could have been paid off, and other clubs would have, not had the hit they have had financially by having those games scheduled in. This time last year, they knew Bury were getting promoted. They would have scheduled their fixture list. They would have done the fixturing in the summer, and they would have done costings and profit margins, and it makes the other teams and the other 23 teams in the league have more certainty. So I think the EFL should hang their heads in shame. And Bolton, that same week, nearly went to the wall as well. And the way they dealt with Bolton was pretty disgraceful. And people go, but they're football players. Yeah, but this is League One, League Two level. Players have lost their jobs. Club staff have lost their jobs. Pubs and cafes in the location of Bury have lost trade on a match day. So economically, people have been financially hit. So there you go. What sports? I'm going to finish with this. I'm going to answer this. This is a very interesting question, actually. What sports system do I like more? Promotion, relegation, or franchise systems? Franchise systems reward failure. Promotion, relegation rewards success. Plain and simple. Franchise systems like the US have and the AFL have, because the NRL franchise club system with no promotion relegation doesn't have a draft, which means it's a different kettle of fish. But the promotion relegation system we have in Europe predominantly and South America rewards success and punishes failure. But then people criticise it, goes, it leads to boring team sport. Does it though? Because when you can get a lottery draft pick higher to rebuild your team, you can tank. I hate tanking. I absolutely 100% hate tanking when teams are deliberately designed to be bad, or they deliberately lose games in order to gain preferential players at the draft that off-season. That's the flaw with the franchise system, is there is no promotion relegation, and it does actually, ironically, reward failure. You are rewarded for being shit. You are rewarded for losing games by getting higher draft picks at the draft lottery, and having higher chances of getting those star youth players coming through who are highly rated. Although it doesn't always pan out. You can always, win well late in the draft, but it does reward failure, and it does raise questions about match fixing and the integrity. And we've seen teams deliberately tank to get draft picks. And it's the race for McDavid, the tank for Matthews. They were things. They were things in 2015, 2016, where teams deliberately played poorly to try and get projected superstar players. Promotion, relegation, I think it means you actually have to play harder. You have to fight for survival, which means teams actually play harder. Even if they're not very good, they have to put 110% in, rather than coast knowing, I'm not going to get relegated. They have to play until the final game to survive. Whether it's the perfect system, I don't know. But with the system we have, they're meant to have parachute payments to ease you do get relegated. But I don't like the draft system, because it does actually encourage tanking, which is basically match fixing. Which you can fix matches and go, we're going to lose 4-0. because we're going to lose 5. We're going to lose 5-0 tonight. I think to call it a draft lottery, I think the teams that don't make the playoffs, that should be a complete lottery where all the teams are put in a hat, all the numbers are put in a hat for the draft picks, and they just pull them out, saying this team drafting first. Therefore, it gets rid of the tank for the David Eichel or the tank for Matthews, where a team is generally that bad by being deliberately set up to lose or generally being awful. It then puts the onus back on the team to improve itself and make itself more competitive in the trade market, and by getting a guy who can actually coach these players out of mediocrity. Because a lot of coaching can go a long way to improve the confidence. I think the draft system is flawed because tanking still takes place. Even though the draft lottery odds have changed, I personally think if you're going to have a draft system or a lottery system, make it a complete lottery where every one of the teams in that league has an equal opportunity. Or you have to find another way of youth development then, a more sustainable youth development model. But that's my personal system. I'm used to both systems here in the UK because we do have leagues with no promotion, no relegation, such as the Elite Ice Hockey League or the National Ice Hockey League here in the UK. We do have, we had for a while the Super League not having any relegation. Well, that's gone away again. So there are some leagues that don't have promotion relegation. The Pro 14, no promotion relegation there. And a lot of the European ice hockey leagues don't have it, but some do. So we have a mixed system in Europe, but we don't necessarily have a draft system. We have a club-based system, which is different to a franchise-based system, which is what the North Americans have, where the youth development is done by youth level or minor level, whereas over here there is an academy youth set up for every club. So those clubs can track their youth players' development through the process. So they can watch from when they join the academy or the youth setup as a young kid, watch them go through the youth levels, and then watch them get into the senior team. I think that system works better, but again, there is no perfect system. I'm more in favour of promotion relegation. There'll be those who are more favouring in a franchise or non-relegation system. But then if you're finishing at the bottom, there's no punishment for losing because you're still in the same league and you can still earn the same amount of revenue from TV and ticket sales. Ticket sales, okay, you might lose fans if you keep losing, which could be the kick up the arse that you need to improve. But if you have a draft system where you have the opportunity to suddenly get better by losing, that's not the way sport should be. Sport should be everyone should go out and win. Taking part in a sport to lose makes a mockery of what the sport is and what the sport's about. My personal opinion, other people have a different view on it. I'm not disagreeing with that different view on it. But my view is I prefer promotion relegation, partly because I'm more used to it. But in certain sports, it doesn't work cost-wise, but other sports it does. So I suppose finance has something to do with it. But at the same time, either system has to be sustainable and either system has to be rigorously enforced that, you don't have teams deliberately losing. And both systems are open to abuse and cheating as well. But I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to leave the stream there. But promotion relegation works for football, doesn't work for ice hockey in this location. That doesn't mean in the Czech league, for example, it does work. It works very, very well. I believe in the French ice hockey league as well, they do it. So other nations, they seem to have it worked out better. But I think it works in Sweden as well. I think but in Sweden, more people play ice hockey, more people support ice hockey. There's more money in the sport in Sweden. So again, it does vary on location to location. But again, the European system is more club-based, where it's a community club where young kids sign up at youth level and then they turn pro at the senior level. There's more grassroots, whereas in North America, it's franchise. So the owner can go, this city's not making me that much money. I'm going to move, to this city here where they might turn up. It is an interesting one. But I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching all your questions, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.